wanted her to know that. So I was pretty honest in my letter and answered her questions. And I never heard back from her, but anyway, I'm sure that got out in the community. I mean, Stacy told me today in the car that I was the topic of some church discussions in the county, which wouldn't surprise me. But what I was saying was that the whole discussion from the community, even if it got nasty or if it got whatever, it stayed in the newspaper. It didn't come through my window, you know, and it didn't come with a nasty anonymous call. People managed to express themselves through the newspaper, or they came up and talked to me, but everybody that came up and talked to me was positive, and many of them were Christians. And so that experience was great. And so I said to the editor of the paper, and he was glad I was going to write a letter because he was tired of printing all these letters. I said I'd like to write a thank you to the community for the way they handled this whole thing. And by the way, I forgot a point. The county attorney did tell the clerk that she needed to take them down. So she reluctantly took them down, and I did finally talk with her. It wasn't very comfortable, but it was, you know, we did have a talk about it. So they are sitting in her office now on the wall. But anyway, so I wrote this kind of thank you letter to the community, and that I would like to read to you because it was the final letter, and it was posted as Allie Walt says thanks about the 10 Commandments. And I wrote, in communities all over the country, the issue of the display of the 10 Commandments in public buildings is a familiar one. When I requested the removal of the displays in 2 of our government offices, I was well aware that in many other counties in the U.S., this type of request is often met with open and active hostility and uproar. So needless to say, I was apprehensive about making this request. In the 7 or so weeks since my request was made and the displays were taken down, I have been incredibly impressed with the way the citizens of Shelby County handled the event, and because of that, I would like to use this opportunity to express some gratitude. 2 people in the county were immediately thrust in the limelight by my action, and I understand that that being put in that position was difficult, so I'd like to thank Lowry Miller and Sue Carroll Perry for their cordial and frank conversations with me on the issue. And they were cordial, sort of, and frank. I kept trying to keep it away from what in the world is an atheist. I would also like to thank the Sentinel News editor Steve Doyle for hosting a fair and balanced, no Fox News pun intended here, conversation on the public opinion page. I thank those in the community of faith and those of no faith who personally spoke to me about their support of my action. I also want to thank Shelby Countyans who wrote and expressed their frustrations and disagreements with me, because that is what community dialogue is all about. During the whole process, it became even clearer to me why our founders designed a government free of church-state entanglements. The views expressed by the people in Shelby County just point to the fact that religion is a very personal and highly emotional topic. That is why those delegates to the Constitutional Convention in 1787 and the framers of the Bill of Rights made both documents totally secular and free of any mention of a deity or any reference to a particular sect of religion. Attempts were made by some to insert religious language or nods to religion in those documents, and the vast majority of the founders rejected those efforts. I find that pretty amazing from a group of men who were mostly Christians or deists. We have strayed far and wide from those original intentions, both in our government and in our courts. It is no wonder so many people are confused about the meaning of separation of church and state. The early Baptists certainly understood that meaning, and for a long time they were the central guardians of it. They knew from personal experience what it meant not to have separation of church and state, as many Baptist ministers were jailed for their objections to paying taxes in Virginia to support the Anglican Church. The reason I bring this up is because my request to remove the 10 Commandments from the walls of the tax-supported buildings does not just represent a view of people who do not subscribe to a religion. The very heart of the idea of separation of church and state, or religion and government, came from people of faith. I remain proud of Shelby County and glad to be a part of it. And one last point, those in the community who posted signs on their private property displaying the endorsement of the 10 Commandments, by George, you got it. And that was my letter, and I was referring to these. These were posted on a couple of lawns in Shelbyville after, you know, these different displays of the Ten Commandments. So I thought I'd give those people a thumbs up because that's where they belong, on your lawn, not in our courthouses. So anyway, that's, you know, if I had to analyze why this worked out so well, I mean, I was kidding around about, you know, God was with me through the whole thing. But I can't really say that. But I think it was a couple of things. One was actually the timing of the decision on McCreary, because that came out in February, the second round where the Supreme Court said no again for the second time. And in fact, those counties are on the hook for $500,000 in legal fees because they kept pushing that. And I'm sure that was one thing the county attorney in Shelbyville had been looking at. So the timing of that, also the fact that I knew so many people in town and I'd gotten that volunteer award, that the community knew me and knew me before all this as being somebody who added positive things to the community. And having a supportive editor of the newspaper certainly didn't hurt me either. So to me, I don't know. You know, I might go home tonight and there's a brick through my window. I don't know. But I was really proud of everybody for the way they handled it, and I meant everything I said in that letter. So if I was going to give somebody advice on it, I don't know where I would start. But those were some of the things I think that came together for me with this whole issue.
Could you just explain real quickly why you're unable to get the letters online at the Shelbyville newspaper? Because you had mentioned that you had to write or subscribe. If we were to look them up.
The letters say that again?
The letters to you mentioned at the AU meeting that you have to get a paid account.
The Sentinel News is the paper in Shelbyville. And I think some other papers are doing this too, though. They're online, but I would refer people to, read this letter or read this article online, and they would go to the Shelby County newspaper and they'd get blocked unless they signed up, unless they were already a subscriber or would sign up to be one. I don't know how many papers are doing that, but I've heard that some are doing that. So that made it difficult for me to, because, you know, I would send them to Paul Simmons and say, read this article, and he'd email back and say, well, I can't read it because it's blocking me unless I subscribe to the paper. So that was kind of a problem.
Do you have them on a computer file that you could send?
I do. I've downloaded them all.
We'll post them up somewhere.
Yeah, I can send you, because I went in and made copies in a Word document of all the letters that I got. I brought Lindy's because it was so funny, and I thought everybody would have it. Wasn't it, Stacy? It was just hysterical. And I had just recently got to know her and her husband, and so I brought that one along for everybody to read because it was so funny. But I can do that. I can forward you know, all the letters so people can see. One of the things I noticed as a pattern in these letters was that we sure are not educating our kids in this country about the founding of this country. And what's happening is the gaps in their knowledge is being filled in by people like David Barton. If you've read anything about David Barton, the first time I heard about him was from a church woman in Shelbyville, and I started looking him up, and I was just aghast. But you recognize David Barton's statements in a lot of the letters from these people, or the arguments coming out of the Creation Institute or the whatever. You can see the patterns, and there was a lot of that going on. Statements like, well, the Ten Commandments are posted right in the Supreme Court where everybody argues. Well, no, they're not. There's a representation of a tablet and it's blank, or it has numerals on it, but there's no script of the Ten Commandments anywhere in the Supreme Court building. But these are the kinds of mythologies and rumors that are going around, and I saw them in people's letters. And it's very, very disheartening. You know, it's like battling this giant windmill of stuff that's being thrown at you. But that was a point that I saw in a lot of the letters. And I think some curiosity about atheism is certainly just, as Stacy and I were talking about, just this misunderstanding or not even understanding what atheism is about and that kind of thing. So, yeah, people were angry, and, you know, but